All right, so this is the person that wrote a petition to EFCC that EFCC should investigate myself and Barrister Deji Adeyanju, who is my lawyer. So very soon, EFCC will invite us for the investigation based on the...
A lawyer filed a petition with the EFCC asking them to investigate VDM and Deji Adeyanju. The reason given in the petition for why an investigation is needed, their protests are, and I am quoting directly from the document, too organized, and the turnout of Nigerians demanding change is surprising. Read that again. The petition to a federal anti-corruption agency citing potential terror financing rests partly on the argument that too many Nigerians showed up. While everyone is debating whether the EFCC will actually arrest VDM, nobody is asking the question that matters more. What does a petition like this, filed by an APC-affiliated lawyer from VDM's own local government, tell us about how the Nigerian state manages civic pressure when it cannot suppress it on the street? Because 4 days before this petition was received by the EFCC, armed thugs tried to disperse VDM's Ibadan protest with gunshots. They failed. So what comes next when street suppression fails? This. Stay with me. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Southwest Nigeria the political analysis mainstream media won't. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. The document at the center of this story is a petition dated June 11, 2026, written under the letterhead of Blessing Agbomhe and Partners and addressed to the Executive Chairman of the EFCC in Abuja. The petition's full title is Petition for the Investigation of the Sources of Funds, Financial Activities, and Possible National Security Implications of the Activities of Deji Adeyanju and Very Dark Man. The petition was received at the office of the Executive Chairman of the EFCC on June 18, 2026. VDM shared a copy of the document publicly on his Instagram page on June 20, 2026. That same day, VDM confirmed he had received a formal invitation from the EFCC, a summons to appear at its offices. Agbomhe asked the EFCC to conduct a forensic investigation into all sources of income, assets, financial resources, and funding arrangements of Adeyanju and VDM, all bank accounts, corporate entities, foundations, trusts, platforms, associations, agents, and intermediaries linked to their financial activities, whether any monies received, controlled, or expended by them were lawfully acquired and properly accounted for, whether any local or foreign individuals, corporations, foundations, non-governmental organizations, or political interests are directly or indirectly financing their activities, and whether any aspect of their financial dealings show indicators of money laundering, unlawful enrichment, concealment of beneficial ownership, tax evasion, unlawful fundraising, foreign financial interference, terror financing, or other financial crimes. The petition explicitly states, this petition should not be interpreted as an outright allegation of criminal guilt against either individual. It frames the investigation as a public accountability measure, arguing that if VDM and Adeyanju are clean, an EFCC clearance would simply reinforce public confidence in them. Blessing Agbomhe is described in multiple sources as an APC chieftain and legal practitioner based in Edo State. VDM publicly identified him as being from Etsako local government area, the same LGA as VDM himself. Agbomhe is the principal partner at Blessing Agbomhe and Partners. He is not a government official, not an EFCC employee, and not a named victim of any act by VDM or Adeyanju. He is a private citizen who is also an APC member, filing a petition against two critics of the APC government. The petition does not disclose who, if anyone, instructed or funded Agbomhe's legal firm to file this document. It is signed and filed under his firm's name, on his firm's letterhead, in his firm's capacity. The timing of this petition is the single most analytically important fact about it. VDM led the mass Ibadan protest on June 16th, demanding government action on the Oriere school children abduction. During that protest, armed thugs confronted the crowd with gunshots and thrown objects. VDM held his ground. National and international attention on VDM and the Ratel movement reached its peak in the 48 hours following that confrontation. The petition was filed on June 11, 5 days before the Ibadan protest. The EFCC received it on June 18, 2 days after. VDM confirmed the EFCC invitation on June 20th, the same day as the Ekiti state governorship election. The sequence: petition drafted, protest happens, petition actioned, invitation issued. Whether the petition was prepared in anticipation of VDM's activism or whether its receipt and actioning were accelerated by the Ibadan protest is not established, but the calendar does not hide its own logic. The EFCC's powers under its Enabling Act allow it to receive petitions, conduct investigations, and prosecute persons for financial crimes. The critical legal question here is whether Agbomere's petition provides sufficient basis for a lawful EFCC investigation. Under the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, a money laundering investigation requires a predicate offense, an underlying crime from which illicit funds are alleged to have been generated. Agbomere's petition does not allege a specific predicate crime. It alleges that VDM's protests are large and well organized, that this is surprising, and that this surprise warrants investigation of funding sources. That framing civic activity as the suspicious activity does not meet the standard predicate offense threshold that a proper money laundering investigation requires. The EFCC Act also provides that the Commission may investigate any person reasonably suspected of financial crimes. The standard is reasonable suspicion grounded in specific facts, not general political suspicion. A petition arguing that someone's protests are too well attended is not, on its own, reasonable suspicion of a financial crime. Agbomere's petition invokes the phrase terror financing in its title and in its request that the EFCC collaborate with security agencies. Under the Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, terror financing involves providing funds knowing they will be used for a terrorist act or by a terrorist organization. IPOB, for example, has been listed as a terrorist organization by the Nigerian government. VDM's Ratel movement has not been listed as a terrorist organization. Deji Adeyanju's Concerned Nigerians has not been listed. Applying the terror financing framework to civic protest against government security failures, specifically the Oriere kidnapping, with no allegation that either VDM or Adeyanju has any connection to a listed terrorist organization, is a legal stretch that any competent court would dismiss. The reason the terror financing label matters politically, even if it fails legally, is that it allows the petitioner, and any media outlet that reports the petition without careful reading, to introduce the phrase terror financing into the same sentence as VDM and Adeyanju's names. That association is the objective. Whether EFCC acts on it or not, the phrase has now circulated alongside their names in dozens of news articles. The genuine legal question is not whether this petition is well-founded. It is whether the EFCC, under political pressure, chooses to treat it as well-founded anyway. The EFCC is not a fully independent institution. Its chairman is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Under the Buhari administration, the EFCC was used against perceived political opponents. Under the Tinubu administration, the question of whether the EFCC maintains institutional independence from the presidency is one that Nigeria's legal community and civil society monitor carefully. If the EFCC issues a formal invitation, which VDM has confirmed, that is already beyond the petition. An invitation is not a charge, but it is a signal that the petition has been received and treated as sufficiently serious to action, even before any evidence of a financial crime has been produced. The most direct beneficiary of this petition, regardless of whether the EFCC ultimately acts on it, is the political interest that wants VDM and Adeyanju to spend their time, energy, and legal resources responding to a federal investigation rather than organizing more protests. An EFCC invitation requires a formal response. It may require legal representation. It creates documentation obligations. It consumes the very bandwidth that VDM and Adeyanju would otherwise direct toward their civic work. That is the strategy, not prosecution, disruption. The petition does not need to succeed in court to succeed politically. It needs only to be actioned long enough to impose a cost on the targets. Even if VDM and Adeyanju are eventually cleared, as the petition itself anticipates may happen, the months between the invitation and the clearance are months in which they are managing an EFCC process rather than leading a protest movement. VDM has publicly and explicitly stated that the petition was written by an APC member. Agbomhere is described across multiple news sources as an APC chieftain. He is filing a petition that frames civic activism against the APC government as potentially constituting terror financing. He is doing so days after one of the largest opposition protests against the Tinubu government's security management. The Nigerian government has not confirmed any connection between the APC, the presidency, or any government official and Agbomhere's petition. No government official has publicly endorsed or referenced the petition. No APC spokesman has commented. That silence, the silence of a party whose chieftain has filed a petition against the government's most visible civic critics, is itself a political posture. The EFCC's institutional credibility is at stake in how it handles this petition. If the Commission proceeds with a full investigation into VDM and Adeyanju on the basis of a petition that cites protest attendance as suspicious, it will be widely read in Nigeria and internationally as the EFCC acting as a political instrument against civic society. That reading damages the EFCC's effectiveness as an anti-corruption body because it allows everyone who is actually investigated for genuine financial crimes to claim political targeting. Deji Adeyanju specifically has been targeted by state power before. He was detained during the Buhari administration for political activism. His inclusion in this petition alongside VDM is not coincidental. Adeyanju is the legal infrastructure that makes VDM's movement harder to suppress. He knows how to file injunctions, challenge administrative actions, and use the courts to create breathing room for civic actors. Removing or preoccupying him is a specific strategic objective separate from the VDM-specific suppression goal. VDM's Ratel movement and Adeyanju's Concerned Nigerians are not electoral organizations. They do not field candidates, run primaries, or endorse parties. But they perform a function that is directly relevant to 2027. They sustain public pressure on the government's security and accountability record at precisely the moment when the APC needs that record to be framed positively for re-election purposes. A government that cannot rescue kidnapped children but can rapid action a petition against the people demanding the rescue, that is the image problem. And the EFCC petition, by being public, has made that image problem more visible, not less. If what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. The most significant national implication of this petition is not what happens to VDM and Adeyanju specifically. It is what it signals to every other Nigerian civic actor, social media commentator, or protest organizer who is watching how the state responds to the Ratel movement. If filing an EFCC petition against protest organizers becomes a repeatable and low-cost tool available to any APC chieftain with a law firm letterhead, then the cost of public activism in Nigeria has just increased in a measurable way. Every civic actor now has to calculate, can I sustain an EFCC process while also sustaining my civic work? That calculation does not stop activism, but it changes its economics. And changing the economics of dissent is a well-documented state strategy for managing civic pressure without resorting to the cruder and more politically costly instrument of direct arrest and detention.
The phrase terror financing has now been placed on the public record in news articles, in social media commentary, in YouTube video titles, in the same sentence as VDM's and Adeyanju's names. That association is not legally established. It is asserted in a private citizen's petition. But asserted associations, once circulated widely enough, have a documented tendency to outlast their legal basis in public memory. The national implication is a broadening of what the terror financing label can be applied to. Previously associated with Boko Haram, IPOB, and bandit financiers, it has now been used, without legal basis, against a protest organizer and a human rights lawyer. That semantic expansion matters. Section 39 of the 1999 Constitution guarantees freedom of expression to every Nigerian. Section 40 guarantees freedom of assembly. The Agbom-Hera petition does not directly challenge these constitutional provisions. It routes its argument through financial regulation rather than speech law. But the practical effect of using financial investigation as a tool against protest organizers is to impose costs on the exercise of constitutionally protected rights. That indirect chilling effect on expression and assembly is the structural civil liberties concern that lawyers, academics, and civil society organizations will be raising in response to this petition. Civic pressure on government security failures has a documented relationship with government responsiveness, and government responsiveness on security has an economic dimension. The Oriri kidnapping disrupted agricultural communities in the Oriri area, contributed to a months-long NUT strike, and created road and transit insecurity across major southwest commercial corridors. A government that faces sustained civic accountability pressure is marginally more likely to prioritize the resolution of these security failures. Suppressing that civic pressure through EFCC petitions, thug deployments, or other instruments reduces the political urgency for resolution. The economic cost of an unresolved security crisis maintained by a government with reduced accountability pressure ultimately falls on the poorest Nigerians in the affected communities.
Agbom-Hera's petition specifically asks the EFCC to investigate whether
Any local or foreign individuals, corporations, foundations, non-governmental organizations, political interests, pressure groups, or other entities are directly or indirectly financing or facilitating the activities of Adeyanju and Very Dark Man. The word foreign is doing significant legal work in that sentence. VDM's Ratel movement and previous Ratel-affiliated campaigns have received financial support, GoFundMe campaigns, PayPal contributions, bank transfer donations from Nigerians in the diaspora. Yoruba community groups in the UK, Igbo professional associations in the US, Edo community networks in Canada have all contributed to various protest and civic campaigns in Nigeria. If the EFCC's investigation reaches diaspora funding of VDM's activities, it brings the investigation directly into the financial affairs of Nigerian citizens living abroad. That is an extraordinary extension of EFCC jurisdiction that has significant implications for diaspora freedom to support civic causes at home. The U.S. Embassy in Abuja, the UK Foreign Office, Reporters Without Borders, and the Committee to Protect Journalists all monitor Nigeria's civic freedom environment. The EFCC invitation to a social media activist and human rights lawyer following a petition by a ruling party member is precisely the type of development that these bodies track. A formal diplomatic statement is unlikely in the short term. There is no arrest, no charge, no court proceeding yet. But if VDM or Adeyanju are formally charged, the diplomatic response would be rapid and substantive. The U.S. Embassy's previous statements on the 2023 election and the Oriri kidnapping response demonstrate it is willing to comment on Nigerian governance failures publicly. The use of financial investigation and anti-money laundering frameworks against civic society actors and protest organizers is a documented global phenomenon. In Russia, foreign agent laws were used to impose reporting and disclosure requirements on NGOs that effectively made their operation prohibitively expensive. In Hungary, Orban-era legislation imposed similar burdens on civil society organizations receiving international funding. In Nigeria, the Companies and Allied Matters Act and anti-money laundering frameworks have been cited in actions against labor unions and environmental activists in previous administrations. The Agbomi repetition follows a recognizable global playbook: use financial regulation, whose language is technical and whose violations are administratively complex to disprove, to impose costs on civic actors that speech regulation cannot impose without direct constitutional challenge.
For Yoruba diaspora communities in the UK and US who contributed financially to VDM-affiliated protest campaigns, including the Oriri Solidarity protests, the EFCC's investigation of foreign financial interference is not an abstract legal question. It is a direct question about whether their contributions to Nigerian civic life expose them to a Nigerian federal investigation. Most diaspora contributors to VDM's causes are ordinary people who sent 5,000 or 10,000 naira via transfer to support a protest. The EFCC's forensic audit, if broad enough, would capture those transactions. The chilling effect on diaspora civic solidarity contributions, if this petition is fully actioned, is significant and deliberate. The most intellectually honest case for Agbomeri's petition is this: Nigerian civic space does genuinely have a history of external funding manipulation. Foreign-funded NGOs have, in documented instances, served as vehicles for foreign political interference in Nigerian elections and policy debates. The concern that large-scale, well-organized protests, especially those that quickly gain international media attention, might be receiving undisclosed external funding is not in principle unreasonable. Transparency in the funding of political and civic activities is a legitimate governance interest. If VDM and Adeyanju have nothing to hide, the argument goes, a financial audit clears them and strengthens their credibility. That argument has surface plausibility. Its weakness is this: the same transparency logic should apply to every major civic organization in Nigeria, including APC itself, whose funding sources and donor networks are far less publicly documented than VDM's Instagram-visible protest campaigns. The selective application of transparency demands only to government critics, never to government supporters, is what turns a legitimate governance argument into a political instrument. Misconceptions in public discourse. 1. The EFCC is about to arrest VDM. An invitation is not an arrest. An investigation is not a charge. A petition is not a conviction. Confusing these stages, as several social media accounts have done, creates unnecessary panic and allows the government to claim, if VDM is not arrested, that the process was fair and nothing happened. The process is the punishment. That is the accurate framing. 2. This petition is definitely APC directed from the top. VDM has alleged APC direction. Agbomeri is an APC member. That is established. Whether the petition was coordinated by the presidency, by the APC secretariat, by a local APC faction in Edo, or by Agbomeri acting on his own initiative as an APC loyalist is not publicly established. The distinction matters for assessing how institutionalized this suppression strategy is versus how ad hoc. 3. Deji Adeyanju is VDM's lawyer in this matter. Adeyanju is a lawyer, and he has previously represented VDM, but in this petition he is a co-target, not VDM's legal representative. They are being investigated together. Adeyanju will need separate legal counsel for the EFCC process, a procedural complexity that may itself serve the suppression objective by requiring each target to manage their own legal defense separately.
The Southwest's strategic interest in this case is not about VDM personally or about Adeyanju personally. It is about what the civic infrastructure looks like in the Southwest as the 2027 election cycle approaches. The Southwest has historically been the region where civic accountability pressure on Nigerian governance has been most organized, most legally literate, and most internationally visible. The NBA's Lagos branch, the Yoruba Lawyers Networks, the Serap litigation tradition, and now the social media mobilization represented by VDM, all of these are Southwest civic assets. A suppression playbook that successfully neutralizes VDM and Adeyanju through financial investigation does not stop at them. It establishes a template that can be applied to any Southwest civic actor who becomes inconvenient. The specific Southwest strategic interest is this. The credibility of Southwest civil society as a check on federal power is a political resource that protects not just activists, but every ordinary Yoruba voter who benefits from a political culture in which the government knows it will face organized, legally sophisticated, publicly visible accountability. Weaken that culture through EFCC petitions, through thug deployments, through administrative attrition, and you weaken the Southwest's capacity to discipline federal governments, including future ones that may be less sympathetic to Southwest interests than the current administration. 3 most likely next moves. Move 1. VDM and Adeyanju appear at EFCC and comply, most likely. Both appear at the EFCC invitation, submit requested documents, and engage the process through their lawyers. This is the procedurally correct response and the one most likely to result in the investigation concluding without charges. A forensic audit of VDM's finances, largely conducted via Instagram donations and transparent public fundraising, is unlikely to produce evidence of a financial crime. The investigation becomes a 6 to 12-month administrative process that consumes time but ultimately clears them. Move 2. Legal challenge to the EFCC investigation. Possible. High value. Adeyanju's legal team, or VDM's separate counsel, files a legal challenge arguing that the EFCC's investigation has no lawful predicate offense basis under the Money Laundering Act and seeking a court order restraining the EFCC from proceeding pending judicial review. If a federal high court grants such an order, it would publicly establish that the petition was legally defective, and it would create a precedent that constrains this suppression tactic in future cases. Move 3. Escalation of VDM's campaign. Certain. VDM has already made clear he will not be deterred. His public sharing of the EFCC invitation and the petition details, turning the suppression instrument into a recruitment tool for his movement, follows his established pattern of converting threats into public accountability moments. Expect the Ratel movement's next planned mobilization to be framed explicitly around the EFCC petition as evidence of the government's failure to answer civic demands on their merits.
The long-term significance of the Agbomhere petition is not whether VDM or Adeyanju are ultimately charged or cleared. It is whether this petition becomes the first case in a new suppression playbook, or whether it is reversed quickly enough, loudly enough, and with enough legal consequence for the petitioner to deter its repetition. If VDM and Adeyanju navigate the EFCC process without charges, and if a court establishes that the petition was legally defective, the playbook fails publicly. That outcome potentially strengthens Nigerian civic space by establishing that anti-money laundering frameworks cannot be weaponized against constitutionally protected protest activity without a specific predicate crime. If the investigation drags on without resolution, the playbook partially succeeds regardless of the legal outcome because the disruption objective has been achieved. That partial success will be observed by every state actor and party loyalist in Nigeria who wants to suppress inconvenient civic voices in the future. We opened with a line from the petition itself. Their protests are too organized and the turnout is surprising. That is the intellectual foundation of an allegation of potential terror financing. Let that land for a moment, because what that language actually reveals is not a legal argument, it is a political confession. An admission that the government, or at least those aligned with it, is more concerned by how many Nigerians are showing up to demand accountability than by any specific financial irregularity. The petition did not produce evidence of a crime, it produced evidence of a calculation that the civic pressure VDM and Adeyanju represent is politically costly, and that the most available tool to manage that cost is an EFCC investigation that imposes administrative burden without requiring the state to answer the actual demands being made. The Southwest's stake in how this resolves is not sentimental, it is structural. The civic capacity to hold governments accountable through protests, through legal challenges, through sustained public visibility is a political asset that protects everyone. And a state that learns it can neutralize that capacity through financial investigation templates has learned something it will use again. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think the EFCC will proceed with this investigation, or will legal challenge or public pressure produce a different outcome? And what does this petition tell you about how the current administration plans to manage civic pressure between now and 2027? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.